And that happened faster than expected. Great. And then in that case, we'll get started. We have lots of things to go through today, so we don't want to be waiting around too long. I'm joined today also by the project lead for the concept project, Zidata, who has a couple of speaker slots planned today, but I just wanted to introduce you here quickly, Zidata, before we get any further. And Zidata, again, the project lead for the concept project, will be outlining where we stand so far today as well. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. I'm sharing on screen for all of you, by the way, a Miro board. This will be central for today's activities. And I'll share the link to that in just a second. This is what we'll be using for all interactive activities as we move on today. I will be kicking off today with just a very quick overview of ASAM. Since most of you are familiar with us, this will be very, very quick, so no worries there. I'd like to spend the most of that time, however, outlining providing a bit more technical motivation to this project, providing some more context from other ASAM activities, and outline the goals of today to make that clear for everyone, and also give you a bit more insight into the project process in general, for those of you that are new to ASAM projects, just so that you have a good feeling after today where we stand with this project and what the process is going to be looking forward, and what that will require from you if you would like to participate. Then we'll have a quick look at, by Zidata, a quick look at the past results of the OpenODD concept project. The paper, again, is published online. I'll be sharing the link regularly today, and that's the central basis for all of the activity now looking forward. A lot of work was already done there. A lot of discussions already took place. Zidata will fill everyone in on that. And again, that's also available offline. We have a short slot planned for a quick introduction of the OpenXOntology by the project lead, Jumbo, just so that everyone can sort of categorize that in the back of your heads, because we'll be touching on ontologies every now and again today. And I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce ASAM's ontology there. And we have a couple of ideas that we wanted to put onto the table with respect to that for the OpenODD project in specifically, and we'll get to those later on as well. After a quick slot for some general questions and a short coffee break to revitalize your minds, we'll jump straight into the interactive part of today. And there we will really start focusing on getting some more detail defined, let's say, for the technical content for this project. So gaining a better shared understanding of what needs to be done and in which order and how long we're going to need for it, in order to really start giving this construct OpenODD as a project some more form. We'll come back together after that, have a quick summary, and then we'll go through what the next steps are going to be leading up to a potential OpenODD version 1.0 project, what needs to be done in that time, and just a general timeline so that all of you can start maybe discussing internally in your companies as well, whether you will be able to commit to participating and when in such a project. So moving on to what we really want to achieve today, and that's twofold. On the one hand, our main goal here is to help you as representatives of your companies decide if you want to and are able to participate in a potential ASAM OpenODD project. And again, we'll go over what that means, what the expectations to participants would be there, and what the current scope and the planned scope is for the OpenODD project. And this will hopefully leave you, then you'll be able to leave today with a better understanding of what this will mean for you and your companies looking forward. And again, we want to define an initial roadmap for this project and an associated working structure for the project in order to start to continue shaping the project proposal. So this is something, the project proposal is sort of the central document that underlies this whole process, and I'll touch on that again in just a second when we look at this project process at ASAM. Very quickly, who is ASAM, right? Nothing new to the majority of you. Not-for-profit standardization, focus on generally on implementation standards that are much closer to tools. They are non-regulatory standards. The development in these projects for as will be the case for the next OpenODD project, is completely non-competitive. They're open groups, open to all ASAM members. And all of the content there is driven by the participants in those projects, i.e. by the ASAM membership, right? So ASAM itself provides the structure, the infrastructure, the framework, and the support. We enable the development of these projects, but the content itself comes from you guys, you are members. And as you can see by the number of participants here today, we've now cracked the 80. So there's a lot of interest in this project, and we hope that at ASAM we'll really be able to make the best of, we'll really be able to enable you to the best of your enablement in order to make sure that this is the best project and the best result as can be. We have 8 domains at ASAM, 7 at the moment on this picture. The focus for today and for these standards, of course, the so-called simulation domain, which contains all the OpenX standards. And this is also the targeted domain for the OpenODD standard. And lots and lots of content in the simulation domain I won't touch on in any detail here. Now having a look at a bit more at the technical motivation. And it all started back about 1.5 years ago when we started looking at scenario-based testing and trying to help the industry better understand how the ASAM OpenX standards enable scenario-based testing and various other workflows along those lines for ADAS and AD. And this is a graphic I've shown quite a few times, but whilst designing this graphic, it became clear that there are still some gaps in the ASAM OpenX landscape that need to be filled to really make sure that the standards that ASAM provides really strongly support this approach in such workflows. One of them being, of course, the need to have some ODD description. And of course, there's lots of activities worldwide, whether it's at PSI in the UK, at ISO, or wherever else. And of course, here the intent is to come up with something complementary, which is what OpenODD now becomes. And Siddhartha will be touching on that. But also the need to have some more support on towards the testing side of things, right? Which is why at ASAM we initiated the so-called test specification study group. And this study group had the clear goal of examining from a top-down approach the different test techniques and use cases for testing and for homologation of ADAS and AD. And this was a study group that was ongoing all of last year. And the report that they published is now actually available online. So you feel free to have a look at that in your time. There's a lot of content there, a lot of content. And the outcome is a set of so-called use cases for testing and homologation, including the use of scenario-based testing for different goals, and all sorts of other sorts of testing, how these interplay with each other in different workflows, and how they can be used together to achieve, again, different goals. And based off of that, the study group came up with various recommendations to existing standards and also for new standards, what that need to be done to continue to increase the support in the industry for testing for ADAS and AD. And one of those outcomes, again, I'm just going to focus on one of them because there's a lot of content in this study report, was the need to have a standardized interface between 3 parts that are crucial in many workflows when it comes to testing for ADAS and AD. And the simplified view here, of course, tries to depict that. So when we're testing, we have some test cases. Generally, these test cases are specific to some operational design domain. And when we're talking about scenario-based testing, we also have lots of different scenarios that are relevant to these test cases and within this ODD. And the project group defined the need to have an interface between these 3 building blocks, if you will, in order to make exchangeability across different use cases and workflows for testing to really encourage this usability and exchangeability. And this is an activity that will probably be initiating at ASAM in the near future. Independent of that, I won't go into detail on this interface today, there was a clear need to have a formal taxonomy and an underlying maybe ontology that's used or that applies to all of these different building blocks, whether we're talking about content in our scenario, our test case, or our ODD, there was a clear need to make sure that we know we're all speaking the same language. And this is where we now come to the OpenXOntology at ASAM. And which is why Jumbo, in a later start today, will be presenting the ontology at ASAM, in order to give you a better feeling for how the ontology could potentially fulfill the need for this underlying framework, if you will, across all of these. And this is, of course, important because when we talk about OpenODD, we're also talking about ODDs in general and the interaction with scenarios, with tests, and anything else that we deem as relevant. So a core set of requirements towards such an underlying ontology will come from this OpenODD project. So we feel there's a strong need to closely develop this ontology, this taxonomy, together with this OpenODD project. And again, we'll jump into a bit more detail on that looking forward, into how we think this could be done in the scope of this first project. Excuse me. That's so far for the motivation. I'd just like to spend 1 minute very quickly on the project process. The project process at ASAM is relatively simple. At the moment, we are in the proposal phase, right? We are starting the proposal phase for a standardization project. Behind us, we already have the so-called concept project, which supports this whole process in that it outlines or starts to answer some of the questions that we may need to address, or it starts to outline some of these questions rather than providing answers, and helps to frame the follow-up standardization project, i.e. this project. We are currently in the proposal writing phase, which means we're currently in this block here. Right? Once the proposal is complete, it will be submitted to the ASAM TSC for approval. The Technical Steering Committee at ASAM is responsible for all approvals and rejections at ASAM on a technical level and a budgetary level. Should they decide to approve this project proposal, then the project is green-lighted and gets to start. Important here, and this should be in the back of all of your minds, is that currently the proposal and this project is targeting the TSC on the 9th of May this year, which means that the proposal document must be submitted to ASAM by the 25th of April. So that gives us about a month and a half in order to make sure that the technical content and the roadmap for this project are set up so that they're ready and can be presented to the TSC in the beginning of May. Following up from that, we'll start, should the project be approved, we'll be able to look at the whole contracting out of service provider support, things like this, but that's all secondary for now. Once we get approval for the project, we'll kick it off with a kickoff meeting. So similar today, we'll have a big meeting where all project members that have signed up to the project can join, and we'll start looking at the working mode looking forward. And of course, we'll have a development process, a review process, and then we'll lead up to a final release. Excuse me. One important point, and that's what we'll be looking at in today's breakouts, of course, is we need to have a pretty good understanding of when you, as members, would be able to commit to such a project and over what period of time, because this is, of course, critical to being able to define a roadmap, a realistic roadmap. We need to be able to understand when will you, our ASAM members, be able to participate in the project and commit resources, and how many resources you'll be able to commit in order to better figure out how to position this project in the roadmap at ASAM as a whole. So the later breakouts today, and we'll go into a bit more detail after Siddhartha's talk, we'll have a look at beginning to outline the roadmaps and the technical content for each of the different work packages in this project in order to help us figure out how much time this project will need, how much effort it will need in that time from all the different individuals. And this will give you something with which you can decide internally at your companies whether you will be able to commit to something like this. So that would be then the second step. So the first step today, again, a rough outline of the project, its content, and the timeline. In the second step, leading up to April, from you, a set of commitments to the project, should you be able to, in order to help round off the proposal so that we have a good overview of which ASAM members are able to commit to this project and how much, which of course is important to making sure that this project is successful. Are there any questions so far? And again, feel free to raise your hands, type anything in chat if you have any questions. Just give it a few seconds to see if there's anything here. Looking good. Okay, in that case, either I've completely lost everyone or everyone's completely on board. I guess there's only one way to find out. In that case, I would like to hand back to Siddhartha to give us an overview of the concept project, so of the results so far. We'll follow that up directly with the OpenXOntology, and then we'll have a short Q&A, after which we'll jump into detailing out the expectations towards the breakout sessions for today. Siddhartha, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. If I try to share my screen, I think you need to stop sharing first. Okay, let me know if you can see my screen in full screen mode.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, Ben, for that overview, and very good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody who's on the call from different parts of the world. I can see. I'm Siddharth Khastagi, as Ben said. I was the project lead for the OpenODD concept project, and I'm going to present a few of the findings from the concept project today to all of you. What I'll also do is, as part of a smaller group of people who have volunteered to create the first draft of the proposal for the standardization project, we'll also share some of the findings from that discussion, and those would be put for discussion in the meetings, in the breakout sessions that we have later today. So before we go into the detail of the OpenODD concept project itself, I thought it was important to talk a bit about why are we doing OpenODD as a project itself, as to why are we all spending so much time, resource, and effort on this. So a lot of you would have read numbers around the fact that you need to drive X number of miles, X billion miles, X million miles in order to prove automated vehicles are safer than human-driven vehicles, which has led to this concept of scenario-based testing. A lot of you on the call would be already converted to the concept of scenario-based testing, so I might be preaching to the converted. But a slightly less appreciated concept is the fact that even if you're doing scenario-based testing, it's not enough to just say that we will use scenarios. You need to caveat that by saying as to where would that scenario occur. So for example, if you have an automated driving system deploying in central London, that would be very different in terms of the scenarios the automated vehicle would experience as compared to Phoenix, Arizona. So the type of scenarios is not enough. So it's not just about scenario-based testing. What we need to focus on is the type of scenarios. Another very cliched example from a lot of the presentations that you might have already seen from my side is these are two examples of almost very similar automated driving systems, a low-speed shuttle and on an air side of an airport and at a urban city center. Two very similar automated driving systems, but two very different operating conditions. So essentially what we're saying is your scenarios need to be a function of your operational design domain or your ODD. And we'll go into a bit more detail as to what is ODD and how does that link happen. Just to bring that concept up, home. So if you look at any scenario database that you might have, every organization tends to have its own scenario database, or there might be a few public scenario databases that are out there. These scenario databases might have thousands and thousands of scenarios, and not all the scenarios would be relevant for your particular operational design domain or for your particular ODD. So what you could do is, if you have something like an ODD-based scenario-based testing methodology, you could use the ODD tags or ODD labels as a way to query a scenario database to identify the relevant scenarios for your particular application. So for example, if you look at the first example here, if your ODD is an urban city center, you might use tags like or labels like pedestrians, cyclists, passenger cars, shared pathway to query the database. So essentially what we're trying to say is you're trying to caveat the scenarios that you use for your testing as a function of your ODD itself. So I hope you now appreciate the fact that your scenarios need to be a function of ODD or need to have a relationship with the ODD itself. You can't just dream up a scenario in Antarctica for a deployment in central London. It won't work. But just a few more things to talk about in terms of what are the different ODD conditions. And it's very important to establish, and I think one of our key learnings from the concept project was the fact that we need to get people to speak the same language in terms of terminology. And a lot of the times we tended to conflate the concept of ODD with some other concepts in the testing workflow. So it's very important to understand what is an ODD and also what is it not. So from an ODD perspective, if you look at the standard definition as per J3016 that all of us tend to adhere to, I don't want you to read the entire definition, just focus on the first two words of operating conditions. So essentially ODD defines your operating conditions in which you can deploy your automated driving system. A bit more objectively, there have been other standardization activities which have tried to identify how you define your operational design domain. So here's an example of an activity that was done at the BSI level, which is the British Standards Institute in the UK, who did pass 1883, which essentially created a taxonomy for the kinds of attributes you use for defining an operational design domain. So you've got scenery, which is everything that is geostationary. You've got environment, which is things like weather, illumination, connectivity, and then you've got dynamic elements, which is all the traffic actors in your operating conditions. Now, one of the key things that we've identified in the concept project was the conflation between an ODD definition and a scenario definition. It's a very important distinction that you need to understand because it can lead to a lot of confusion, and it has led to a lot of confusion, but we managed to come through it in the concept project by providing some examples of what is an ODD and what is in scenario. So what you see in front of you is a T-junction, is a single lane T-junction, which is a very legitimate definition for an ODD. So if you use the BSI Pass 1883 taxonomy, you can use the labels like T-junctions and divided single lane, and that is a legitimate ODD definition. At the same time, you can say that my ODD definition is divided single lane T-junctions with traffic, which is also a very legitimate ODD definition. So as up until now, what you see is an ODD definition or a resemblance of an ODD definition. As soon as you start defining the behavior of the actors in the image. So for example, this is an example scenario definition about defining the behavior of the V1 vehicle, the V3 vehicle, the ego vehicle. That's when it becomes a scenario. So when you think of a scenario, you are defining the behavior, whereas when you're thinking of an ODD, you're not defining the behavior. So it's a very important consideration to make, because a lot of the times we tend to conflict and then we tend to end up in a debate as to why are we doing something like this, and we have had that in the concept project. So it's very important that ODD and scenarios are related, but they're two very distinct things. That was a key learning from concept project. So going into a bit more further in terms of another ODD consideration, it's not enough to just dream up ODD attributes and define them as part of an ODD definition if you can't actually measure them. A key part of safety for automated driving system is ensuring that you can identify if you're in or out of your ODD, and you can only do that if you can measure those attributes. So let's take a small example here. Let's talk about rainfall. And here comes the concept of ODD or attribute awareness. So when we talk about rainfall rate, what does it actually mean? How do we actually measure rainfall? Can we measure rainfall by onboard sensing? how do we address the local variability issues when we are actually measuring rainfall? So for example, in the UK, when you're actually measuring rainfall, you get an average of 2 kilometers square area. And is that good enough for the safe operation of an automated driving system? So part of the work on the OpenODD project is also about when you're trying to use an attribute or you're as part of an ODD definition, you need to ensure that what you're defining is actually objectively measurable. If it's not, then we are either doing something wrong or we're using the wrong attributes for defining it. If you want a bit more details on the on ODD concept itself and the link to scenarios, there's a blog in the link over here. You can have a read through it if that's of interest. One another very important aspect for OpenODD project is we're not here to reinvent the wheel. There are other standardization activities that have been out there. I mentioned one in terms of BSI PAS 1883, which provides an ODD taxonomy. There have been activities in SAE from the AVSC group also, the ODD lexicon, J3259, which is another piece of activity that's happening in SAE. In ISO, there's some activity. And obviously, we are here in an ASAM project kickoff. ASAM has its own OpenX family of standards. So we are not here to reinvent the wheel. We are here to leverage what is already existing. So we've been very fortunate in the concept project that a lot of the project members are active in all these forums. So we've been very capable and easily been able to leverage the activities that have been happening in the other domains. But be rest assured, we're not here to create competing standards. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. We are using what SAE, ISO, and BSI are doing. So just to talk a bit more detail in terms of, those were all the considerations, but let's talk a bit more details in what we actually did in the OpenODD concept project. What was the scope? What were the objectives of the project itself? The main objective of the project was to create a format for ODD definition so that we can use that definition, that format and that definition for simulation-based testings of automated vehicles. That was our overarching goal. Now, when you look at simulation-based testing, essentially you just need three things. You need a set of scenarios to start with. You need a test environment to execute those scenarios in, and then ultimately you need a way to make a argument of using the safety evidence that your system is safe or not. In terms of engineering processes, what that entails is you need to somehow create the content of the scenario. You need to format that scenario in a particular language, and then you need to store that set of scenarios in a database. And then you plan the scenario in plan the execution of a scenario across simulation, real test track, and real world testing, finally analyzing the results and making a decision if the system is safe or not. Irrespective of which automated driving system you use, you will always have the same flow. You will always need these three things. How does ASAM OpenX standards play a role in enabling this workflow, in enabling the interoperability of this workflow? And that's where OpenODD comes in. OpenODD essentially is the input to this whole workflow. We start off with the ODD definition itself, and hopefully, if we do a good job of our work in this standard, we can create something that is interoperable and seamless across. So the OpenODD is an input to the create section, which is where we use the ODD definition to create the standard. Then we format that standard in an open scenario and an open drive standard, then store it in a database which is aligned to the open label standard. So essentially, you see how the different OpenX standards play into each other over here. An important aspect here is simulation-based testing. ODD definition can be used by a variety of stakeholders, be it ADS developers, be it regulators, be it traditional manufacturers, be it local authorities, etc., etc. We are not here to cater to all those stakeholders. We in the concept project, we wanted to cater to all the stakeholders, and we found that very quickly that it was almost impossible to create a standard in the time that we had that would cater to all those stakeholders. So we caveated the ODD definition format to say that it's only for simulation-based testing. And I'll come back to this in a minute. And we have an example as to why we believe this is very important to limit the scope to something that is reasonable and achievable in the timeline that we have for the project. essentially, once again, OpenODD is trying to create a format for ODD definition. It is not giving you the ODD definition as the best ODD definition. It is giving you the format that you will use to create your ODD definition for your use case. So in terms of the scope of the concept project, we've identified the scope, and this is the work that we've done over many months in the concept project. We've said that there would be a core ODD specification, which would be underpinned by a taxonomy on an ontology, and it will have various extensions. We within the project team tend to call this as a colorful bricks figure, which has become iconic in the project. But what we're trying to say here is you can have an ODD definition, which is the core over here, and then you can have multiple extensions as to how you use the ODD definition. So for example, you can use it for measuring, for metrics, for coverage. You can use it for querying. You can use it for partitioning. You can use it for exposure probability. You can use it for uncertainty measurements, etc., etc. And then from an application perspective, you might want to create libraries on top of the OE definition if you want to make it as part of your simulation-based testing workflow in an automated manner. So those are all things that we think are extensions to the core OE definition. It is important to highlight that what we're saying here is these are extensions and these are not part of the core OE specification. There's a slight change to this in the standardization project proposal, which I'll come to it in a minute. So the way we structured the concept project was in 4 work packages. We started off with a work package on attributes, which was trying to ensure we have got alignment with the standards at that point in time, like BSI PAS 1883, OpenXOntology within the ASAM forum, and the ISO 34503 standard. Work package 2 focused on the specification and the format side of things, which was focusing on the syntax and the semantics of the language itself for simulation execution, which is a key over here. Work package 3 was focusing on metrics and measurement, and work package 4 focused on the defining uncertainty attributes associated with an ODD. So those were the 4 work packages we dealt with. So work package 1 was led by Nico Croce at DeepenAI. Work package 2 was led by Jason Zhang at WMG. Work package 3 was led by Bernard Kaiser at ANSYS, and work package 4 was led by Eddie Schwab at that time with MSC Software. So in terms of how we came up to, with the concept in the concept project, it was just not saying one person, this is the language and this is how we'll do it. We started off by creating different user stories. Who are the different users of the concept of an OpenODD language? And based on those user stories, we created the list of requirements. We had a use case examples trying to illustrate what those requirements meant. Just again, very important so that all of us understood the requirements in the same manner. And what we then did, we had two different syntaxes for ODE definition language. So we illustrated the requirements and the use cases in those example syntaxes. We've illustrated the open issues that we thought we did not have time to fix, but we thought we needed to fix, and something that we will bring into the standard project. At the end, we ended up with a concept paper, which many of you might have already read. So just to give you an example of why we focused on simulation-based testing, here's a quick example here. So what we're trying to show you here is a requirement from the OpenODD concept project and how we have established in 2 different syntaxes in the concept paper. So the requirement here was human and machine readability, 2 very competing requirements of sorts, if you might say. And there's an example use cases that ODD states that the motorway is only suitable when there is no rain. Upslope is not suitable as vertical geometry. So essentially, it's trying to constrain the operating conditions of your automated driving systems. You could look at it from a more programmatic perspective, like the syntax 1. You could look at it a bit more on the human readable side, like syntax 2. So one of the things that we've learned from doing the concept project is while both the syntaxes are very legitimate, you could keep them. It is important to focus and deviate from something for simulation and something for regulators or local authorities. And one thing that we are saying for OpenODD standardization project is we are limiting the scope to simulation-based testing. And we'll come to that in a minute in terms of what that means for us in terms of scope. So what were the different deliverables from the OpenODD concept project? So you had the concept paper itself, which you, as I said, you might have already read. All the requirements have been illustrated into sample syntaxes. You also had the ontology web app, which has the online portal with all the ODD attributes and their ontological relationships. This was all published in November last year. And all this work is not a few months work. It took us almost since September 2020 to November 2022. So almost like 2 years of work that went into from ideation to project kickoff to a conversion phase. So you see, this phase was a very important part of our activities, because the initial phase we understood different people understand ODD in a very different manner. So we had to go through this phase of trying to converge what an ODD is. So when we start the standardization project, we will give all the members with some sort of a reading material so that we don't have to do this phase again in terms of what ODD is and is not. So we ended up in with a final group review in October last year with the concept paper released in November. And so we are here today in March of 2022 with the standardization project kickoff, which we plan to submit to TSC in the April, as Ben mentioned in his talk. So what would be the key next steps from a standardization project for OpenODD V1.0.0? It's no longer a concept. It would be V1.0.0. So the key thing that we came up with a small group of people who were part of this concept project in terms of trying to scope the project proposal. By no means final. It's a proposal for all of us to debate today as part of this proposal kickoff workshop. Is a slight change in the colorful bricks image that you had seen in the concept paper. So what we are now saying here is the ODD specification is in its entirety influenced by taxonomy and ontology and has extensions to it. And the extensions could be qualifiers, could be metrics, could be situation uncertainty, everything that you've seen earlier. But we're saying maybe we haven't identified all possible extensions. Maybe we'll have new members in the standardization project who might have new use cases which might require additional extensions. So what we're saying, essentially, there are three things that we want to work on. One is the ODD specification, which will be a combination of syntax and semantics, and the extensions. And all of them would be underpinned by a taxonomy or an ontology. From an application perspective, that might mean that you might want to create some basic libraries, which as part of your toolchain activities, you might want to use that in processing third-party applications or monitoring, real-time monitoring, etc., etc. So those are the things that we feel are slightly outside the scope of OpenODD, because those are usages of OpenODD, not the specification itself. So the scope is the bit in the green box. Within the extension orange box, we're not saying that we are going to do everything. We will pick and choose what we want to do as a priority, and we'll do those. There's a breakout in the second half of the workshop where we'll focus on extensions only, and the group would be tasked to identify what are the different priorities for the extensions. What do you think should be absolutely done in the version 1.0.0 of OpenODD standard? I can absolutely say in front of you today that we will not be able to do everything. It's not possible given the timeline that we will have, but we will absolutely like to do the ones that the industry really needs urgently. So please do participate in the breakout session on the extensions to help us illustrate which are the extensions which would be the top priority for us as part of this standardization project. Here is a set of proposed work packages. I would highlight the word proposed. It's by no means is final. A whole idea for today is to identify if this is a good proposal to start with, or if we want to change and add or delete work packages. So what we're saying is we'll have 4 work packages similar to a concept project, but very different work packages. So we'll have a work package on syntax, we'll have a work package on semantics, we'll have a work package on extensions where we'll prioritize different extensions, and then that would lead us to create additional work packages which will be focused on the explicit extension that we are working on. So you might want to say that as a group, if we decide that there should be metrics and situation uncertainty should be the two key extensions that OpenODD standard should have. So we might say work package 3.1 and work package 3.2 is metrics and situation uncertainty respectively. And lastly, we've got a work package on applications. I would be quite keen to understand from people on the call if you feel this would be useful. There is a session from one of my colleagues, Zhang Botao from AVL, who will be talking a bit about ontologies, and maybe an application of ontology in OpenODD could be one of the things that we might want to explore further. Again, in terms of harmonizing the OpenX suite of standards at ASAM itself. So that's where we are in terms of the standardization project. So these are the proposed work packages. These are the priorities. We'll come to the timeline later on in the session. We are essentially looking at an 18-month project with a finish of end of 2023, with hopefully with a kickoff in May this year if the TSC approves the proposal paper that we submit. Happy to take any questions. I'm Siddharth Kasti now, or we can take them later. Ben, over to you. I can't see hands, so you have to guide me.
I don't think we have any hands raised. Let's see if there's any more questions. Again, Siddhartha will be running away, hopefully all too fast today, so feel free to keep posting your questions in chat and we'll take it from there. Gil has a hand up. Gil, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ensure one comment. When you show the drawings of the ODD specification, within the ODD specification, there is the taxonomy/ontology block. I think it has been discussed, and I think it's important to clarify that defining the taxonomy is not part of the OpenODD project. And in fact, we do intend that the specification mechanism and format will be able to utilize various taxonomies. As we have seen, there are different sources of taxonomies coming, whether from SAE, ISO, or others. So the format should be able to digest those different taxonomies.
Yeah,
I think.
Thanks, Gil. Absolutely. I think I'll go back to one of my earlier slides where I said that we are not here to reinvent the wheel. So the taxonomies and the ontology work has already been done across different standardization bodies, including ASAM. So we will not be doing that. What I meant to say here is that we will need to consider a taxonomy and an ontology. You can't have a specification without that. That's what's the intent.
And I think that leads us very nicely into the next point. And maybe I'll just quickly introduce it after having been involved in the discussions, and then hand over to Jambo to give us some more details. And I'll speak from two different perspectives here. I'll speak first from the high-level ASAM perspective, and then we'll look at it from the OpenODD perspective. And I completely agree, first off right off the bat, Gil, with your point that this specification needs to be designed in such a sense that it's not dependent on any specific taxonomy. That's a very clear goal. I think it's also stated in the proposal and the concept for a paper. Nevertheless, as Siddhartha just mentioned, it needs to have some base taxonomy of which can be used during the design and in I guess, some initial compatibility. And of course, extension mechanisms can allow in some way, of shape or form to extend that even further. The OpenXOntology is a separate project at ASAM. And one of the problems we encountered, which has prevented us from releasing it as a version 1.0, rather, which has led to us releasing it as a concept for now, is that the use cases for applying and using the ontology in the industry are still nebulous, I think is one way. And the intent here is to provide with the OpenXOntology to cover one of the clear use cases for it, which is together with an ODD specification, in order to show how the OpenXOntology can cover this use case, to develop it parallel to the OpenODD project in order to make sure that it can cover everything that the OpenODD format requires. So really develop it together and sort of tailor make it for this OpenODD standard. To, on the one hand, benefit the OpenODD standard, so it has a taxonomy from the get-go that directly supports it, but also to benefit the OpenXOntology to help focus the scope of the OpenXOntology per se. And we feel that this is a mutually beneficial interaction, which is why it's being introduced here today. One of the things that we're discussing in the breakouts after Jambo's presentation will really be to look at, is this something that the project group sees as possible? How could this be approached? Taking into account that one possible approach that we see at the moment is integrating the OpenXOntology as a work package in the OpenODD project, wherein it is continued to be developed and to explicitly cover the requirements of the OpenODD project as it develops. Again, so that on release of OpenODD, there's a very clear taxonomy or ontology that directly supports it, and vice versa. The details of this, of course, need to be brainstormed in the upcoming breakouts, but also looking at further in the project how this can and should be done. The intent here today is just to introduce it as one of the possible factors that could be integrated into the project proposal. So that's speaking from the ASAM hat. The other approach, I think you guys have covered already in any case, but to make sure that we're able to develop the format, we need to have something that ensures that in all of the different discussions that we'll be having, which might be quite abstract because we're starting from scratch in many cases, we need to have something tangible to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. And using something existing, whether it's the OpenXOntology or anything else, of course, makes those discussions much more easy. So that's again a part of the meta discussion that needs to take place in these work packages. For today, again, it's just brainstorming on whether this is a feasible approach, what this would entail, and whether there is an interest in the potential project participants in this call here today in supporting such an activity and committing resources to participating in such an activity. That will, of course, define whether this happens or not. If we have enough interest in actively developing the OpenXOntology for OpenODD, then it's something we can integrate as part of the OpenODD project. If we don't, then we don't, and it won't be done, right? So that's sort of what will drive this, but we need to have an initial discussion on it, and that's what the Breakout 2 will be looking at. So after talking about the OpenXOntology there, then I'll pass over to the project lead for the project, Jambo Tao, who's just going to give us a quick overview of what actually the OpenXOntology is to better help the discussions along in the breakouts. And then we'll take it from there. Jambo, over to you.
Great, Ben. Can you hear me? And I'm sharing my screen.
I can hear you, but we can't see your screen yet.
Okay, I hope we can see it soon.
There we go.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Perfect.
Yeah. First, yeah, thank you very much, Ben Tidada, for the introduction. So Jambo Tao, my name, coming from an AVL, the list in Graz. And yeah, in next minutes, I will give you a short overview as Ben and Tidada introduced that information about OpenXOntology. And yeah, so this is the background. So Ben already showed that in his presentation. So initial motivation of OpenXOntology is that to set up a domain model, which is planned to share the semantic and the entity information cross over the OpenX domain, and to support the other projects. I will also show you the mapping and also the harmonization that we did. And yeah, so in a simple word, what is ontology? Ontology is a formal and semantic specification and also definition for all the entities and also their behaviors and also relationships on a semantic level. And we use in our standards the language is OWL to the model the ontology. Okay, next slide. Yeah, we construct our first structure a three level approach. We have a core representing the basic the concept and the relationships for the domain level. Domain level, you can understand that this is our key structure and also the taxonomies that we aligned with the different OpenX standards. I will also show you the later a short live demo about the ontology file. And the next thing is that we didn't incorporate a lot concept and also the content in the previous project is on the application level, because as Ben said, there are still some open points, and also the next directions that we need to identify on the application level, how to use that and how to utilize the OpenX ontology in a proper way. So that's also a main background that why we would like to have a further investigation with OpenODD. This slide provides you somehow the overview of the advantage of OpenX ontology, that we use OpenX ontology now for a different project as a backbone, and this is the main building blocks that can maybe we can pick up some blocks for the next discussion. For example, for the query and also the reasoning, and also provide a harmonized domain model and so on. So in next two slides, I will show you that how is the use case from the open label project that we did with our OpenX ontology. And this slide is a short summary about that, what kind of harmonization work that we did. We did the harmonization with the open scenario 1.0, and 2.0 is not done yet. And we did also with OpenDrive 1.6, OpenODD concept project, Open Label 1.0, and these two are not done yet. And we did also align with BSI PAS 1883 and also the ISO 34503 in terms of the scenario domain model. Okay, yeah, so this is a very quick overview about that what we did the use case with Open Label project. As you can see, that this is all the main content in the Open Label stuff, and the actions, objects, and also the events, and also the relation. And all this semantic information to use the backbone from OpenX ontology for these further activities. So these slides I will show you that what is the main phases of the use case from left to right. This is somehow the raw data set colleague from OpenLabel provided. As you can see, this is a very simple scenario on a two-lane ego vehicle on the left lane, and on the right side there are two the vehicles that overtaking the ego. Now, and this is the semantic information that the colleague already did with the linkage with the OpenX ontology, and this is somehow the output from this pre-processing, and all these things learn what kind of road, and also this relation type of is part of, and also is the vehicle behind, and also the quicker, slower. All these things are done with bridge to OpenX ontology, and this, as you can see, is the core and is a subset of a core and domain model of the OpenX ontology. So this I will show you later in a live demo file. Yeah, so this is a structure that Siddhartha already presented. So yeah, so we need to plan and have a further discussion. How can ontology be integrated for different work package in OpenODD? Yeah, so as Ben already stated, that we will release soon, that's the first release of OpenX ontology, and there are all the main parts that will be included in the first release. We will provide you the source OWL file indicating the core and the domain level, and we will give you also a model reference. And we will have also a concrete minimal working example set to show the people that how this can be done from the scenario-based testing workflow, of course. And we have also the specification and also the user guide in terms of these three parts. Yeah, so before I close my presentation, I will just showing you that this is the open source tool called ProTG, which is ontology editor. So can you see my screen of this ProTG screen, Ben? Maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, exactly. So I will start from the domain model. So our domain model is also harmonized and also aligned with ODD structure. So you can see we have also mainly the three main parts: the ambient part, in terms of the weather, the lightning stuff, and also the time information. I will not go to every leaf node. And second part is also the load topology and also the traffic infrastructure part. We have the drivable area, we have the fixed, and also the other traffic zone, other parts. And the last part is the traffic participants and also behavior part, including all the participants and also their activity part on different level. Okay, and these are also the main content set we harmonize within our domain model. We can definitely use that for our OpenODD development. Yes, so that's all from my side. So yeah, any questions, or we can maybe have a further discussion in the concrete discussion slots.
Thank you, Jumbo. I think moving this discussion into the breakouts will be necessary, just looking at the time that we have. And again, I look forward to the discussions there. What I suggest now is that I very quickly just outline the breakouts again. I'll share the link to the Miro board in the in chat, and with all of you will be able to access this. And in this, the interactive part of the breakouts will begin. Again, we're going to have 2 breakouts. I'll just very quickly bring that up on the screen for all of you, and then we'll take it from there. The breakouts will be split into 2, and again, these breakouts are to keep they will be randomly assigned. So we have so many participants, we can't assign each one individually. What we'll be doing here is just we have some moderation in both of these breakouts that will introduce the topic and start the discussion off. The clear goal of these breakouts is not to ask you all to commit to taking part in these breakouts, so they might not be your area of expertise, but is to just collect your ideas and continue forming the technical content for the project. So the first breakout will be looking at the syntax and the semantics for OpenODD, some of it which is already outlined in the concept paper. The outcome of this is going to be essentially, hey, what do we need to do in this project in order to come up with the syntax and semantics for OpenODD? In other words, an initial roadmap for that content and some suggestions towards how to structure it on the timeline. The second breakout will be looking at, as already mentioned, the extensions, the potential extensions for the OpenX domain and others, looking at the discussions around the taxonomy and the ontology, so the applications. By looking at the current proposition, thinking if there's any more ideas that you want to bring onto the table for this project. And also as an outcome, coming up with an initial roadmap, hey, what do we want to prioritize and how do we want to approach it, right? So an initial roadmap also for this technical part of the project. And after today's workshop, what the proposal group will do is sit down and have a look at this and start bringing it together to come up with a more overall form of a roadmap, which will make it easier for you again in your companies to decide if you can commit to the project and to individual work packages in the project. So that again is the second step after today's workshop. The breakouts will run for 45 minutes. In that time, again, we have moderation in both breakouts. When you join the Miro board, you'll be brought to this page here that you can see on my screen now. And depending on which breakout room you are in, 1 or 2, you will have a working space either on the left or on the right-hand side. And the moderators will lead you through the content there. Both pages have a rough template for coming up with an initial timeline. Again, don't go into too much detail. The idea here is just to get a rough idea for what you need to do and how much time you think it might take in order to start coming up with some form of an overall roadmap. But most importantly is the initial discussion in syntax and semantics on how you're going to sharpen the requirements towards the format and the syntax, how you're going to do that in the project. Further points that anyone wants to bring in there, of course, will come up in the discussion. For the second point, it will revolve again around the extensions, how they're structured, what they contain, and hey, will this extension be necessary for a first release, or is it something that can be done but can be done later, or is it something that we don't even know if we need to do because we need more information, right? So in a sense, coming up with a list of extensions and topics you want to address, and in which order, and maybe in which level of detail. So maybe some extensions don't need to be completed for the first version, what needs to be completed and what can be shifted in order to help us better define the scope for this first project. After 45 minutes, we'll come back together, have a quick summary from each of the rooms from the moderators, and then I will walk us through the next steps as we start finishing off this proposal for the ASAM TSC in May, including the expectations towards project members and other roles that we see being necessary in this project. For example, project leads and things like this. So that is something that we'll touch on when we come back after the breakouts. I would like to ask now Dorothee Bassermann to open up the breakouts. In parallel, I'll start a 5-minute timer, which is just a quick coffee break for everyone. And when we come back, we will meet in the individual breakouts. You should receive a pop-up on your Teams window asking you to join the breakout. Feel free to do so, and we will meet back here in the individual breakouts, in 6 minutes. So that means at 20 minutes to the hour. So 13:40 CET, the breakouts will continue. Right. So feel free to grab a coffee, buy a break, whatever you need. And when you come back, you'll have the window asking you to join the breakout.
Had to add something, but okay, perhaps we do it in written then afterwards.
It seems it's quite brutal. Just stop.
Yeah. Anyway,
Teams has no mercy.
I put it
apologies if any of you were leading some interesting discussions. I know there was one still ongoing in the second breakout session, but in the interest of time, we need to start wrapping up. In any case, nothing will get lost. This is just the start, or not even yet the start, to a project where lots of continued discussions will take place. If the other breakout is anything like our breakout, we realize that there's a lot of discussion that still needs to take place before we can start further concretizing the roadmap, which is fine. I don't think the expectation was that we have a perfectly clear picture after today. Rather that we give everyone a chance to chime in with further input on to better understand what is going on and what's planned for this project. And that one important point to mention is that it's not static yet, right? We have a current status, what we know needs to be done for OpenODD, whether it's defined in the concept paper or in the minds of those who participated in the project or who want to participate. Experience has shown that none of these new standards ever end up the way anyone expected in many aspects. So please, if you do have input or discussions that you want to do, this is the right place to do so. And just because it isn't captured yet doesn't mean it can't be discussed or addressed in the scope of a project. I hope that the different breakouts gave all of you an opportunity to at least better understand to gain a better grasp of what needs to be addressed in these different sessions. And again, hopefully that gave you a bit of a sneak peek into what the project will be looking at. I just quickly ask in a few minutes the breakout 1 and breakout 2 to give us just a quick summary of your discussions, some highlights that you discussed, maybe to give the ones who weren't there to participate a feeling for what went on. And then we'll just have a quick look at what's going to happen next, right? Because again, this is very much still in the forming stage of this project. So if I hand over to you, Siddhartha, maybe to just give us a few minutes on your breakout.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ben. So we had quite a bit of discussion. We couldn't finish the roadmap as highlighted. We went through some of the fundamental understandings of what is the scope of the project itself. And in the earlier session, I talked about having the OpenODD language for simulation-based testing, and we came to a conclusion in the group that it's not actually for simulation-based testing, it's actually to restrict the type of users that would use OpenODD as a language, maybe for test track testing, maybe for hill simulation. So we are restricting it from the type of users like local authorities in terms of the language format. So there's a point on the Miro board, you'll see that it's about the restriction of the type of users rather than restriction to simulation-based testing, which has an important implication on the format itself. There was a comment about the format should have a capability of capturing uncertainty, and what is the level of detail that we will define when we are trying to define the syntax, which is something we've suggested that it would be a collective decision of the group. In terms of the requirements itself, we showed the 15 clusters that we had in the concept paper, and there was a suggestion that all 15 are relevant, but there needs to be a prioritization of the requirements in order to understand which needs to happen immediately. We didn't do the prioritization in the group in the breakout session because not everybody on the call had read through the OpenODD concept paper. But what we highlighted was the first thing that we need to do when the project starts is a prioritization of the requirements of what is part of OpenODD standard V1.0. The next thing we mentioned was, given that we have 3 different format proposals and we might have a 4th and a 5th that might come in during the project phase, which if somebody was not part of the concept project, the first thing after the prioritization of requirements was to do the requirements matching against those format proposals. And the last one was to create the enhanced concept phase. The idea of matching the requirements against the format proposals is at the end of that exercise, we work with only one proposal. There's no point trying to in parallel develop 2 or 3 proposals, language proposals. So the idea is phase 1 is prioritization of requirements. Phase 2 is matching of requirements against those matching of those prioritized requirements against the format proposals, and then selecting one format and then enhancing that further. So in terms of the timeline, what we're looking at is at least a couple of months for the requirements prioritization, a couple of months for matching the requirements against the format proposals that we have. We will hit summer holidays during that period, so it would take longer in actual days. And then we've got the enhancing of the language phase, which would be the bulk of it. But we decided that we can't just go about enhancing the language without actually highlighting which requirements to do and which language format to use. So that's where we are with the syntax and semantics. There's still lots to do, but at least I think we've got a good starting point in terms of the key things that we need to do in the roadmap. Ben.
Thanks a lot. Any questions to that summary? Okay, then great. Then I'll hand over to Jason for the same thing, please.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I will try to quickly capture, but if I missed anything, any member from the breakout tool, please jump in. So we actually did not manage to do a prioritization, but we actually covered extensively on the meaning of each of the blocks and illustrating the reason behind them. So I think starting from the ontology is we identified the there is a need for focusing on the integration of ontology into the OpenODD format. So the focus shouldn't be on the ontology content itself, but more on how we can integrate to the ontology. So that including all the requirements that we would need to such ontology or taxonomy, also including, for example, the extensibility and basically all the operations an ODD description would need on the ontology. We need to make it clear. And I think one of the noting here is to define a work package that aim to use OpenXOntology as an example of implementing such requirements, and also to investigate, the possibilities. But also we allow third-party taxonomies also to have this possibility. So this requirement will also apply to any other third-party taxonomies if it's not OpenXOntology. And then we iterate through measures, uncertainties, exposures, and queries. And I think for all of them, we discussed that the qualifiers is actually a overarching requirements to all of them, because qualifier by itself has carry little meanings, but only when we use qualifiers to interact uncertainties, measures, exposures together with the mandatory part of the OpenODD, we actually need qualifiers. So in that case, we actually remove the qualifier as a standalone extension, but they will be embedded into different sub extensions. And yeah, so basically we quickly go through what is measure, what is uncertainty, and what is exposure. So a quick summary is measure basically allow you to specify some informations like how many kilometers of certain roads in your ODD. And uncertainty is basically we have also developed in the concept phase at initial shape, basically allow you to specify the occurrence, for example, of the pedestrian and embed that to your ODD. So rather than a black white with or without pedestrian, this actually incorporate the probability into this black and white boundary. So including this the occurrence probability. And exposure is something also brought up in the discussion. Basically, one of the example is if you have a railway crossing in your ODD, such railway crossing might be very rare in real life, but once if the system is placed at a railway crossing, even though it is very rare situation, it's very crucial and safety critical to the system. So we would like to have some sort of ability to explain such exposure of the ODD elements in the real world. And the last part is the query. So query actually is linked very closely to ontology. Basically, what are the requirements on the format in order for performing query? So if you have if you have two ODDs, how would you query one ODD against the other, whether it's overlapping or include or exclude? And also if you have a runtime data, how or ground truths, how would you compare such list of ground truths together with the ODD? This is also a form of query. And also if you have multiple smaller section of ODDs, how would you build a wider one? So that was also discussed in the query. And we have an additional input into the extension, which is the situational awareness, trustworthiness of ODD elements. And that discussion, we haven't actually went too far, and we actually run out of time. So yeah, so basically these are a quick summary, and missed any, please add from our group.
Great, thank you, Jason. Yeah, so hopefully that in both groups you now got a good feeling about what's going on there. That brings us very nicely into the last part of today. If there's any other questions, so let me just quickly check the chat. If we have any other questions or raised hands, it looks good. Excuse me. In that case, then I'll just lead us all to the last wrap up for today. Starting off with what's going to happen next. And I've tried to break it down into a couple of specific steps, right, based off of what we've discussed here today. And of course, the first thing that we need to do is take the outputs of today, all the inputs of today, let's say, from the breakouts, from the discussions, and together with the current proposal group, which is the group that's been writing the proposal document so far, continue refining the content of that proposal. And what we will do is make those proposal meetings that take place to refine this document available to you. So anyone that is interested in participating in these forming discussions can do so. Right. At the very top of this document, you'll see the important links. One of them, again, linking to the current version of the project proposal. And in that, you'll see the current status and the to-dos. The biggest to-dos at the moment, of course, being figuring out the technical content and how to approach it based on the concept paper and putting that into a roadmap, right? Which is why the next step is going to be figuring out this technical content at a high level and putting it into some form of a roadmap, because this is something that when it's shared with all of you, makes it easy for you to figure out if you commit to participating in this project, right? So step one is this first roadmap will be worked out by the project proposal group. I expect the first version of that to be available within the next 2 weeks, based on the proposal meetings that we'll be having. And again, the invites for that will be sent out. That will be shared with all of you so that you can then decide if you can commit to participating in this project. We will open up on the ASAM website. News will go out for that. Enrollments to participate in this project, essentially asking you to provide the name of a company member who will be participating in the project and the resources over the project time that they will be able to allocate. One important point there is that currently, and you might have seen it on your roadmaps, and I'll just bring it up again, currently we estimate that this project will run at the very least until the end of next year, starting the public review in Q4 of 2023. The project is slated currently to start in May of this year, right, after the ASAM TSC, and aims to run at least until Q4 of next year. So that is a time frame that maybe will make it easier for you to decide if you can commit resources to participating in this project. In general, we normally say around 30 or so man days per year, something as a ballpark figure that the experience has shown is necessary for participating in projects like this. But more information on that will be released as we come up with a more detailed roadmap. In any case, we will, as already said, for step 2, we'll be opening up for your commitments for this project, which will allow us to define a more detailed roadmap once we have a better understanding of how many participants this project will have. So how big will the project be? What influence will that have on the scope of the project? And will there be a need from ASAM's side of things to support the project with, for example, budget that ASAM provides for additional support via, for example, service providers? This is something that ASAM makes available for every project, and it's up to the project group, based on the limitations of its size, to decide on what budget they need and for what content. And this is something that will be subjected to approval in the TSC. Once we have your commitments and all of that, again, we'll be able to fill out step 3, which is basically in the project proposal, going into a bit more detail what the project is doing, how the project is structuring itself. So what work packages are there? How is the project set up? What are the dependencies, right? So basically coming up with a more detailed project plan. In parallel, we're opening up invitations to everyone looking to participate in the project for additional responsibilities in the project. So looking here, if you are interested at, for example, project leadership, work package leadership, all sorts of roles like that. And more information on this will be provided in any case later on as we get closer to the project starting, right? So this is just something that we'll look at in more detail later on. The final deadline for the proposal is the 25th of April. So by this time, the technical content and the initial roadmap or the roadmap of the project needs to be in the proposal document. What does not need to be finalized, but it is a nice to have, is your commitments. Obviously, if you are able to figure out earlier, if you can participate in the project and can enroll earlier, it makes planning for the project significantly easier. But the cutoff for joining this project is when the project kickoff starts, so when the project officially starts, which again will be in May. So please stay tuned on ASAM news channels for the invitation for enrollment for this project. You will all be receiving a wrap-up email from ASAM after today's workshop that basically summarizes the discussions and the content of today, summarizes the next steps, and also gives you the needed information for continuing to participate in contributing to the proposal for this project. And hopefully that'll give you a good feeling of being able to participate in this project when it gets started. Are there any further comments, questions, or suggestions for today?
Ben, Siddhartha here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think isn't the TSC on the 25th? So the proposal needs to be submitted earlier than that.
No, the TSC was shifted by 2 weeks. It's meeting now at the beginning of May, which means the deadline to submit the documents 2 weeks before is the 25th of April.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? The recording of today will be shared in the email as well, in any case. Okay. In that case, I'd like to thank you all again for taking part today. I think this project has the potential to be an extremely interesting platform for lots of discussions and really filling a niche in the market for this standard. I look forward to continued discussions with all of you. If you have any questions after today, please feel free to reach out to myself. I'll just quickly put my email on screen here in case anyone, or I'll post it in chat in case anyone has any questions. Again, that's the place to ask. And otherwise, stay tuned for on the ASAM news channels and more coming shortly. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.